Polson, Montana is the destination of our next episode of Painting and Travel. Sarah will speak with the founder of the Miracle of America Museum and take a ride on an antique steam-powered tractor which Roger sketches and paints in oils on canvas.
I'm standing on the property of Gil Mangles. For the past 30 years, he has been collecting all sorts of fascinating things. And so when you come here to the Miracle of America Museum, you can just step into history. It's a treasure trove full of historical items, and it's like a time capsule that you can walk into. He's got 40 buildings that you can go in and check out. He has all sorts of wonderful displays, and I'll show you quite a few of them. Right now, we're getting ready to take a ride on a steam-powered tractor. That'll be my first time on that.
Whenever I travel, I always carry a sketchbook with me, and if there's not time to do a painting in the field, I'll do a quick sketch or two. It helps to familiarize myself with the subject, but more than anything, I simply enjoy sketching. I like to use a black ballpoint pen, or sometimes I'll use a fine felt pen for the job. This is a complicated subject with lots of curves and ellipses, so I'll rely on photos when I do the painting, but spending a few minutes on the drawing lets me see and realize details that I might otherwise miss even in a photo, and at the same time sharpen my drawing skills.
Thank you. And thanks to David. Nice work, David. That's incredible. I want you to meet Gil Mangles, who's the founder of the Miracle of America Museum. Gil, I had a wonderful ride on this incredible machine, and I love machines. I love old cars, tractors. This is the first time I'd ridden on a steam tractor, and I was reading up a little bit about it, and I understand that this isn't just one-purpose vehicle.
No, multi-purpose machine, correctly called a traction engine, and the steam-powered, the live steam. They had the firebox there. They would burn any number of fuels. Wood was predominant, but they even had straw burners when they were thrashing grain. They could burn the straw in the firebox, anything to boil the water to make steam. Now, we have chosen not to use live steam because it can be dangerous. Usually it's operator error, and But anyhow, we're using an antique air compressor, so any steam engine you can use compressed air on, and it's much quicker, safer, and easier for us.
Well, it worked great, but I did hold on tight.
I noticed you let go of the pipe once in a while or blow the whistle.
Yeah, that was great. I'm glad you mentioned that. And I see you have other tractors here. How many tractors in total do you think you've got on the premises?
About 30, some of them from very small riding tractors, and antique ones, some walk-behind tractors, some diesels. We have 4 steam traction engines. Now we kind of take turns with our live history day shows and just run them once in a while, just keep the oil lubed up in the moving parts. I
had fun walking around here because I noticed you do some sculpture with odds and ends of metal parts left over, and I like your Tractosaurus over there. Okay. And what I also like is that it's really a hands-on museum. As many fine, valuable things you have here, some are under glass, but you can get up really close to just about everything you've got here. And it brings history to life for me in a really nice way.
This is a fascinating subject, and I'd like to paint old cars, old machinery, and old vehicles, so I think this might make an interesting painting. I'm going to be using oil paints today, and I'm using a 24 by 30 inch stretched canvas. And down here on my right, I have my computer monitor with a number of photographs that I took on location, including a number of detailed shots. Well, I don't think I can start with a very large brush today because there's so many small details in here. Now, last night I drew the steam tractor on here in pencil. I did put a thicker coat of gesso on this canvas to begin with, so I didn't get quite as much tooth as I normally might. And then I just covered the canvas with this burnt sienna tone to get rid of that white. And that gives me a better base in which to start. I have used other colors as a base too, depending on the subject. Sometimes I'll use a bright red or a blue, but generally on a landscape painting like this, I'll use an earth color such as burnt sienna. Well, I'm going to start with my darks, ultramarine blue and burnt umber. Give me a nice dark. Now this is a brand new brush, so it's got a nice chisel point on the end of it. So this is a good choice to start painting this. I do have some older brushes here, and they tend to be a little frayed. That might be good for background, but where I need to cut in a lot, a new brush really is of benefit. One reason I put another coat of gesso on here is because I wanted this painting to look like it had a decent amount of texture on it without having to put on tons of paint. Now, an oil painting needs to have paint on it to look like an oil painting. I don't want it to look like a watercolor, so I don't want to use my paints very thin. On the other hand, having put some texture on the background already sort of solves that problem. So I can put on thinner paint and it will still look like this painting has a lot of body to it. After this is drawn out, it's almost a matter of paint by number because I can't really get too wild with this thing as I could maybe in a landscape. I really have to follow my lines here. I am starting with my darks first because if I were to start with the lights, painting light colors over dark colors, especially in oils, the paints will tend to get chalky very quickly because the white or a light color will mix with the darker color, but painting lighter colors over darker colors seems to work better. Get into less trouble doing that. I'm pretty sure I'm going to lose some of my lines here. This is all very dark in this area. Right now it's pretty arbitrary as to what areas that I'm working on. I'm just looking at my photograph here and I'm trying to see most of the darks. Now, working with oils, I will tend to keep this painting looser than were I to use acrylics because the paints do mix very easily because they're always wet. But on the other hand, if I'm using acrylics, they dry fast and I can go over it and put details over it because an area would be dry in a few minutes or a short amount of time, and then I could go put details in here. So that's one advantage with acrylics over the oils. On this painting here to my left, this old car, this was done in acrylics, and I've done a number of these paintings. I call them my Route 66 series. As you can see, there's a lot of texture in these paintings and a lot of detail, and the acrylics was very good for that. But this particular piece here, I hope to try and keep it looser than those Route 66 series of paintings. There's nothing like using a new brush. With few exceptions, I always use my computer monitor to look at my reference photos. One nice thing about using the computer monitor is I can zoom in and out of the image and grab a little more detail than had I printed it out on a piece of paper. It's much brighter too, much more vivid. Right at the top of this cylinder up here, it's going to be catching more light from the sky, so it's going to be cooler. So I'll put some cerulean blue in there, be catching the light coming down from the sky. Now under here, it's going to be just the opposite. This is going to catch a lot of warm light. So down in here, this is going to, I'll have to put some reds or burnt umbers or burnt siennas in there. Now I have two other colors going on in this painting, primarily some greens and some red-orange colors. So I'm using my chromium oxide green, and I think that might be just about the right color for some of these areas here. Of course, these colors are going to vary depending on how the light is hitting them too. It's really very difficult to keep a painting like this painterly unless you do it in an impressionistic manner. That's not what I want to do with this particular piece. I want to keep it more in the line of some realism. A lot of these areas in here are just going to sort of fade and blend together. And after a while, this will start to fill in and it will start to look like something. Right now, it's pretty piecemeal. I'm going to keep my paints kind of segregated here, keep my grays and dark colors here, my greens here, and then maybe I'll make another pile over here with these warm orange tones. I think I'll put out a little orange here too. Now one thing that's going on here as I'm painting this is all these colors that I've put on here now are being compared to this burnt sienna color, which will eventually vanish. But if I were using just a white canvas, then these colors would even give me more of a false sense of accuracy. Anything that's going to catch a lot of light will need more pigment, more paint on it. The painting will look much better and much stronger if it has some good, strong brush strokes that you can actually see. Now, the thin areas like these darks, the paint can be thinner, but the light areas should have more texture, more brush strokes. Just make the painting look more painterly. The dark areas won't have the texture because light is not hitting it, so you just don't see everything that's going on in a subject. But if light is hitting it, you do, in real life, in real nature, you just tend to see more of what's happening. So what we're trying to do here is sort of mimic nature by applying more paint to areas that are catching more light. Some burnt sienna and alizarin crimson, make a nice dark red, maybe for the back of this wheel here. Really helps to have a nice brush to cut in these areas. Brushes that have been around a while and have started to have frayed edges are good for some things, landscapes and all, but if I'm doing a structural thing, for instance a house or this subject here, a nice sharp edge on this brush is very, very helpful. This is a nameplate right here on the side of the steam tractor, and as it goes back in there, it tends to get kind of dark, almost loses itself. It's a nice thing about a painting like this. There'll be some areas that are very well defined and other areas that just fade into one another. Now here again, if I were to just paint this sort of a solid gray color here with some variations, then I would lose these lines. And so what I'm doing is just sort of doing the paint by number thing, so it's more easy for me to go back and paint the exact area where these treads are. These are incredible machines. I can see where a lot of people could get hurt running farm equipment like this. We were lucky to be able to see it run. This wheel in the front here has no treads. It's just a smooth. And I'll use heavy paint to apply some texture in there. This wheel has picked up a lot of dirt and things along the way, so I want to get some variations in my brush strokes here to look like it's not just been to the car wash. Well, I have that out. I might as well put this one in here. Over to the left. Let's pick up some of this darker gray. Make a few variations over here. Maybe a warmer color. Maybe put some burnt sienna down here. It's always going to pick up warmer light as things reflect off the ground. I'm trying to keep this pile of paint right here dark and not mix any white in it. That will be this dark color that I don't want to get contaminated with any other colors, especially light colors. Now when I say that light areas should have more paint, should be thicker than areas with dark paint, that doesn't necessarily mean that the dark areas have to be thin. It's just that the light areas have to be thicker. You can make the whole painting thick if you want. I mean, you can do it with a palette knife and the whole painting could be very thick, but traditionally that's how it works. Anything that's light has more body to it. Now that I've put that stack on, I can dip into my lighter colors and put that highlight on the side. Now, if I were to start with the lighter color and try and put the dark over it, it'd be much more difficult because it would become almost impossible to get it as dark as I wanted to. But it's a lot easier to put the light colors over the dark colors. So let me show you. I'll take this piece of cardboard and we'll put a dark color on here, and then we'll put a light color right next to it. Now with my light color, I can go over this and I can obviously make this dark color lighter, quite easy to do. But if I wash my brush out and I take my dark color, and then if I try and make this as dark as this, it's impossible to do. You just can't do it. So it's much easier to paint light colors over dark colors than it is dark colors over light colors in oil paints. Now I'm going to zoom in on my reference photo so I can see some of these areas in here. Still very gray up in here, but there's some subtle differences, subtle changes along the way. This is a big flywheel right here. Well, I tell you, this thing it's almost scary to watch it run. It's just gears and things flying everywhere. Taking some green and red. One good way to cut down your green is to add the opposite color, which is red. Now on the underbelly of this tank, I'm going to pick up some burnt sienna because right under here it's going to be picking up a lot of the warm light from the ground. I'll take a bit of orange as well, put that in here. So just very warm tones on the underside, cool tones on the top. Cadmium red light, burnt sienna will make this dark orange color, and I'll mix other colors in with that too, burnt umber. Just want to get that very dark, almost a dull orange at this point. Put some highlights and some accents in later, but I don't want to get that very bright right at the first part of this painting. I want to reserve some of the really bright colors, like some bright oranges, for later, which will act as some accents. Right up here we have two steam whistles. These stand out nicely, give some nice shapes up in here. Now as you can see, I haven't put in the background yet, and I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do with this background. Thought I would put this in here first, but probably pretty soon I should add some kind of color to this background, I think I'm going to make it very simple, probably not much detail at all, just sort of maybe a soft focus thing. But that's, we'll have to develop as I go along. I may not be that good of an example when it comes to actually preparing something to paint, because when I start a canvas like this, I really don't have too much of a preconceived idea of what I'm going to do or how the painting is going to end up. I'm just letting it fly and I'm working it out as I go. I'm trying to be careful not to blend my colors as much as I probably would like to, just to keep it somewhat painterly. If I put a stroke on like this, instead of blending it all out, I try and leave it. It's very hard to do actually for me, just to leave something alone. The tendency is to blend everything, but to make a stronger painting, leaving a lot of those brush strokes is probably a good idea. Some of my dark red, again, put that right up in here. Well, I'll put out a little more ultramarine blue. I try not to be too stingy with my paint. It's really a nuisance squirting out paint all the time. I don't want to waste paint, but I really want to use it and not have to worry about the economics of paint. Paint is the least of my economic considerations when doing a painting. There's, a lot of time that goes into a painting, and I don't want to skimp on the materials that I use to make the painting. That would just be not wise. So I use as much paint as I want. Got some light areas where these treads are. Don't be afraid to use as much paint as you want. Per painting, it's very economical. I'm totally losing all those spokes that I drew in there. But at least by putting them in there in the first place, I've sort of familiarized myself with them. I'll just drag this highlight right around the outside of this big wheel. I'm painting this a solid color gray, and while this is still wet, I'll suggest some of the pipes, and I'll describe the things on this particular motor. I'll take my burnt sienna, some of these warm colors here. I'll add a few of the details. I'll only just suggest those. It's kind of fun not having to add every detail. If I can suggest something and it says what it needs to say, I think it's much better than putting in all the information, all the detail. A few small highlights here and there. Now that I have all these large areas in place, I can work on some of the details. And really, this is just a matter of looking at my reference photographs and following them as closely as I can and using any artistic license whenever I choose. I won't be able to show you every stroke that I do here on these details, but really it's just a matter of using some patience and time to get everything where it looks right. Right in here, I've added more warm reflective light bouncing up from the ground. I'm going to add lots more detail to the tractor, but for now, I think I'll put in the background and then finish off more detail towards the end. I think I want to keep the background kind of a neutral color, so I'm taking cerulean blue and some yellow ochre, just making a pale gray, bluish gray. And just to test how it looks, I'll just put some of this in here right now and then work down lower and put in what I think will be a field back here and then just some gravel and dirt in the foreground. So right now I'm just sort of testing my color palette to see in a small area what might work. I don't want very intense colors right back here, so I am going to add some white to it to cut down the intensity. But maybe a field here of, it looks like maybe some wheat or something like that. Then over here, and I'm not going to cut in here too closely because I might want to change these colors. And I'll put some more of this sky color over here. And then we can, after I put in some of this, I can get more of a sense of if these colors will be right for the rest of the painting. Now, if these colors aren't right and I don't like them, I have two choices. I can either wipe this off or just let it dry for a couple of days, paint over it, but I think this might work. On this area, of course, we do have a lot of shadows underneath here, and I want to vary this color in the foreground quite a bit. So I'll pick up some different shades here, maybe some warmer tones and cooler tones, and mix those together and sort of mix it up. A lot of these paints I can mix right on my canvas and not have to mix everything right on my palette. Some of these burnt sienna colors that were applied before I started my painting, if some of these show through, that might be nice. It will just give a nice warm feel to this piece. Well, after putting these three tones on here, the sky, this field, and the foreground, I can see that this area here is too light, so I'll need to change that. So I'll make some adjustments here, make this a darker color. That will give some contrast between these three areas. As they were too much the same value. Well, I have the background all in place now, and to finish this painting, all I need to do is use a small brush and add some of the details, the spokes, and the lettering. And to do that, I'll keep checking my reference photographs carefully as I go. I'll finish this area right here with some lettering. With some lighter colors of gray, I'll add these different dimensions to the front of this boiler. This has dried some, so I'm able to put this paint on here and it shows up. With some yellow ochre and white, I'm going to finish this painting by putting in this lettering and this logo. Well, that should finish this painting of the steam tractor. It was a great subject to paint, and Sarah and I enjoyed being at the Miracle of America Museum in Polson, Montana.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansemer, visit paintingandtravel.com.